When most people experience an avoidant partner pulling back, the immediate interpretation is rejection. Silence feels like abandonment. Distance feels like indifference. And your mind begins to spin with the thought, if they loved me, they wouldn't act this way. That's the lie the brain tells you when you measure love only by presence, affirmation, and closeness. But here's the shocking truth. Sometimes distance is the clearest sign that an avoidant is in love. It's not the absence of feeling, it's the overflow of it. Let me explain why. Love, to someone with an avoidant attachment style, doesn't feel safe the way you imagine it should. For them, intimacy isn't just closeness, it's a threat. When they feel deeply connected, their survival instincts ignite. Every fiber of their nervous system screams, this is dangerous. You're about to lose yourself. Protect. Retreat. Guard your independence. And so, they pull away. Not because they don't care, but because they care more than their nervous system can handle. This is the paradox of avoidant love. The more it matters, the more they withdraw. Think about that. If you were irrelevant, they wouldn't need to pull back. If you were meaningless, they wouldn't need to protect themselves. Indifference doesn't create withdrawal. It creates nothing but love. Real, terrifying, life-changing love. That activates every fear they've ever buried, every wound they've ever hidden, every wall they've ever built. Love shakes the foundation of their identity. And here's what's fascinating. Most people assume that withdrawal is the ultimate form of rejection, but it isn't. Rejection is final. It's cold. It closes the door and never looks back. Withdrawal, on the other hand, is an internal war. It's not about you. It's about them wrestling with themselves. It's about their heart wanting to run toward you, while their fear forces them to run away. If you can reframe that, if you can see their withdrawal not as the death of love, but as the struggle of love, everything changes. Now, I want you to imagine what that feels like for them. Imagine being consumed with emotions that you can't process. Imagine feeling drawn to someone so deeply that it threatens your sense of control. For an avoidant, control is safety. Independence is security. But when they love, when they truly love, that control shatters. They're not pulling back from you. They're pulling back from the fear of losing themselves inside you. And here's the piece that most people miss. The act of withdrawal is, in itself, evidence of attachment. Think about it. If someone has nothing invested, they don't need to withdraw. They simply walk away and never think of you again. But when someone loves, when someone is tethered to you emotionally, the act of creating distance is a strategy. It's survival. It's them saying, I need space to breathe because this matters too much. The danger for you is misinterpreting that withdrawal. If you chase them, if you panic, if you make their retreat about your worth, you confirm their fear that love is unsafe. But if you can stand still, if you can hold your ground without begging, without over-explaining, without trying to pull them back prematurely, you give them something rare. You give them the chance to face their own fear. You let them discover that love doesn't have to mean losing themselves. And that's when breakthroughs happen. That's when avoidants start to come back, not out of obligation, not out of guilt, but out of recognition. They begin to realize, this love isn't here to suffocate me. It's here to strengthen me. But you only get there if you can endure that first pullback without mistaking it for rejection. Now, let's be clear. I'm not saying you should tolerate endless cycles of emotional disappearance. I'm not saying you should become a prisoner of someone else's fears. What I am saying is that you must learn to interpret behavior accurately before you assign meaning to it. If you see withdrawal only as abandonment, you'll respond in ways that sabotage the relationship. But if you see it as an avoidance way of saying, this is getting real, and it terrifies me, you can hold a different kind of power. The power of patience, the power of understanding, the power of letting love prove itself over time. So the next time silence shows up, don't immediately assume it's the death of love. Don't let fear trick you into chasing or collapsing. Instead, see the withdrawal for what it often is, a clumsy, imperfect attempt to protect something fragile, something valuable, something that matters. Because in the psychology of the avoidant, distance isn't always the opposite of love. Sometimes, distance is love's disguise. And here's the thought I want to leave you with: rejection is clean, it's final, it's absolute. But withdrawal is evidence of conflict. And conflict means something powerful is at stake. So when you see an avoidant pull away, don't rush to the conclusion that love has died. Realize instead that love is alive, so alive that it scares them. Because when an avoidant withdraws, it's not always the absence of love. It's the proof that love is present. When we talk about love, most people imagine warmth, comfort, security. They picture a feeling that brings peace. But for someone with an avoidant attachment style, love doesn't begin with peace. It begins with chaos. It doesn't land softly, it crashes in like a storm. And here's the paradox: the deeper they feel, the more dangerous it feels inside their nervous system. Love, for the avoidant, is not a gentle embrace. It's an emotional overload. Their system interprets closeness not as safety, but as threat. And it's not because they're broken or incapable. It's because of the conditioning they've carried for years, maybe decades. Somewhere in their history, love was paired with loss, intimacy was linked with pain, and vulnerability equaled weakness. So when love arrives, the alarms go off. Their body says, "This is power." What overwhelms the avoidant is not rejection, it's connection. And when you realize that, you stop taking their retreat personally. You start seeing it for what it is: a nervous system trying to survive emotions that feel bigger than they can handle. Think about your own life. Have you ever been so overwhelmed by emotion that you didn't know what to do with yourself? Maybe it was grief. Maybe it was passion. Maybe it was joy so deep it scared you. That's the exact experience an avoidant has with love. It floods them. It hijacks their equilibrium. And because they're wired to prize independence, that emotional flood feels like drowning. Now, here's where the psychology gets interesting. For most securely attached people, love and freedom can coexist. They can be in a relationship without feeling like they're losing themselves. But for the avoidant, the equation looks different. Love equals closeness, closeness equals dependence, and dependence equals danger. So the more they love you, the more they feel the pull to escape, not because you're doing something wrong, but because their internal wiring says, if you stay too close, you'll be consumed. This is why so many people misinterpret avoidant behavior. They see the push-pull cycle and assume it means indecision, disinterest, or manipulation. But in reality, it's none of those things. It's an emotional survival strategy. It's the only way they know how to regulate feelings that feel like too much. Pull close, feel the intensity, panic, retreat, calm down, and then circle back when they can breathe again. And here's the key: that cycle isn't evidence of the absence of love. It's the evidence of its existence. Because let me tell you this, people don't get overwhelmed by something they don't care about. Nobody runs from indifference. Indifference doesn't trigger panic attacks. Indifference doesn't light up every fear in your body. But love does. Love reaches into the deepest places of your psyche and awakens both your greatest desires and your greatest fears. For the avoidant, that awakening feels like danger. So what do you do when you see it? First, you stop seeing their retreat as a personal failure. It's not proof that you're unworthy. It's proof that you matter more than they're ready to handle. Second, you resist the urge to fix their fear for them. Because here's the irony. If you chase them in their retreat, you don't calm their nervous system. You inflame it. They need space not because they want less love, but because they need time to process the intensity of it. If you can hold steady, you give them the chance to realize love doesn't have to be chaos. It can be a fire that warms instead of burns. That realization doesn't happen overnight. It happens when they begin to see that love can exist without control, without suffocation, without loss of independence. And that only happens when you allow their temporary retreat to be what it is, a coping mechanism, not a rejection. So the next time you find yourself thinking, they must not love me, they've pulled away again, I want you to stop. I want you to reframe it. I want you to remind yourself that love for the avoidant is not a peaceful entry, it's an emotional overload. And the stronger they feel it, the stronger their impulse to retreat. Because here's the paradox that changes everything. The more love overwhelms them, the more real it is. And if you can remember that, you'll stop chasing fear and start recognizing love, even when it comes disguised as distance. One of the biggest mistakes people make when they're dealing with an avoidant is assuming that love has to look obvious. We're conditioned to believe that love shows up in grand declarations, in constant reassurance, in the traditional signs we see in movies. Daily texts, overflowing affection, words like, I can't live without you. And when we don't see those signs, we assume love isn't there. But here's the truth. Avoidants don't express love in the way you expect. They express love in subtle, almost hidden ways. And if you're not paying attention, you'll miss it. For the avoidant, saying, I love you, isn't just a phrase. It's a risk. It exposes them. It strips away the mask of control they've spent their whole life perfecting. So instead, they express love indirectly. They notice the details no one else notices. They'll remember how you take your coffee, the exact tone you used when you were upset, or that story you told 6 months ago that seemed unimportant to you, but meant something to them. That's not random. That's not casual. That's their heart speaking in a language they feel safe with. They may not flood you with attention, but they'll quietly protect you. They may not say, I need you, but they'll show up when it matters most. They may not write love letters, but they'll fix something in your home, or make sure you're safe when you're walking alone at night, or stand guard in moments you didn't even realize you were vulnerable. And here's the shocking part. Those subtle acts of care often cost them more courage than saying, I love you, does for someone else. Because to the avoidant, those small actions are monumental steps outside their comfort zone. Every time they let themselves invest energy, thought, and attention into you, they're breaking through their instinct to stay detached. So while you might be waiting for dramatic proof of their feelings, the proof is already there. It just shows up in ways you've been trained to overlook. Now, here's where most people miss the point. We tend to dismiss subtle expressions of love because we're addicted to certainty. We want the words. We want the visible gestures. We want love wrapped in fireworks. But the avoidant isn't wired for fireworks. They're wired for caution. Their love shows up in whispers, not shouts. And if you're wise enough to tune into those whispers, you'll realize they're saying more than words ever could. Think of it this way, anyone can say, I love you. Words are cheap, but when someone who fears closeness chooses to invest in you with their time, their attention, and their energy, that's not cheap. That's expensive. That's costly. That's love being expressed in the only way their nervous system can allow in that moment. And let's go deeper. When an avoidant quietly checks in on you, when they ask a question about something you thought they forgot, when they position themselves to protect you in subtle ways, that's their love language. To them, it's safer to act than to confess. It's safer to demonstrate than to declare. So don't underestimate those small things. They are not small. They are the entire bridge between their fear and their love. But here's the challenge. If you dismiss those signals because they don't look like the signals you've been taught to expect, you'll miss the love entirely. You'll tell yourself they don't care, while they're silently proving the opposite. You'll think they're cold, when really, they're terrified and trying in the only way they know how. And this is where your perspective becomes everything. If you need love to always be loud, you'll fail to see it when it's quiet. If you can only recognize love in words, you'll miss it when it shows up in actions. But if you can learn to see through the avoidance lens, you'll start to realize that those little gestures, those subtle, almost hidden acts, are the very evidence that their heart is invested. What's powerful is that once you start recognizing those signals, something shifts. You stop demanding proof and start appreciating presence. You stop pressuring them to perform and start valuing the courage it takes for them to love it all. And that shift doesn't just change how you feel. It changes how they feel too. Because when an avoidant realizes that you see their love, even when it's quiet, even when it's imperfect, they begin to trust you with more. Slowly, the whispers turn into words. Slowly, the guarded actions open into vulnerability. And that's when you begin to see the deeper layers of their heart. So the next time you're tempted to say, "They don't show love," I want you to stop. Look again. Look at the details. Look at the quiet ways they make your life safer, easier. Critical to understand that push-pull cycle isn't a sign that they don't care. It's proof that they're attached. Think about it. If someone has no emotional investment in you, they don't need to retreat after getting close. Indifference doesn't create conflict. It doesn't create fear. It doesn't create the urge to run. It just creates distance, clean and final. But when you're dealing with someone who pulls you in and then pushes you away, that's not indifference, it's inner conflict. And conflict means you matter. Here's why. For the avoidant, closeness stirs up two opposing forces. On one side, there's desire, their heart pulling them toward connection, intimacy, and love. On the other, there's fear, their nervous system screaming for space, independence, and control. That back and forth isn't about you being unworthy, it's about them wrestling with their deepest psychological wiring. They want closeness, but closeness terrifies them. They crave love, but love feels like a trap. So every time you see them lean in, you're witnessing their desire. Every time you see them pull back, you're witnessing their fear. And that cycle, the tension between the two, is the very evidence that love exists. Because if love weren't there, there would be no tension at all. Now, this is where most people sabotage themselves. They see the pullback and interpret it as abandonment. They panic, they chase, they plead, they demand. And in doing so, they validate the avoidant's deepest fear, that love equals pressure, that intimacy means suffocation, that being close will cost them their freedom. And so the cycle intensifies. They run further, faster, harder, not because they don't care, but because they care too much and don't know how to hold it. But here's the powerful reframe. The push-pull cycle is not rejection. It's recognition. It's the avoidant recognizing that something inside them is being stirred that they can't fully handle yet. The pullback is not about the absence of love. It's about the intensity of it. And here's something else you need to see. When they return after the retreat, that's the clearest evidence that love outweighs fear. If fear were stronger, they'd stay gone. But the fact that they circle back again and again means love is winning. Even if it doesn't look the way you imagined, every return is proof that their heart is tethered, even while their mind is terrified. This is where patience and perspective become your greatest tools. If you can recognize the cycle for what it is, a tug of war between desire and fear, you stop taking it so personally. You stop chasing during the retreat. You stop collapsing into self-doubt when they need space. Instead, you learn to hold steady, to let the cycle play out without reacting to every swing. And the more you hold steady, the more their nervous system begins to recalibrate. They start to realize that love doesn't have to mean chaos, that they can come close, retreat, and still find you grounded when they return. That stability is possible. This doesn't mean tolerating endless instability. It doesn't mean excusing toxic behavior or sacrificing your own needs. It means recognizing that the push-pull is not a lack of love, but an imperfect expression of it. And once you see it that way, you have the power to decide whether it's a cycle you want to participate in or not. But at least you'll be seeing the truth. not the illusion your fears try to paint. Because let's be real, when you're on the receiving end of that pull, it's tempting to label it as manipulation, to call it games, to assume malice. But 9 times out of 10, it's not malice, it's fear. It's a nervous system that doesn't know how to relax in the presence of love. And the irony is this: the stronger the love, the stronger the cycle. That tension you feel, as exhausting as it is actually evidence that you matter more than they can admit. So what's the takeaway? Stop misinterpreting the cycle as rejection. See it for what it is: proof of conflict, proof of desire, proof of attachment. Understand that every retreat isn't the end. It's part of the dance. And every return is the silent confession they don't have the courage to speak out loud. Because love doesn't always announce itself in clear, obvious ways. Sometimes it hides inside contradictions. Sometimes it reveals itself in the very act of retreat and return. And if you can see that, if you can recognize the deeper psychology behind the cycle, you stop letting fear drive your response and start holding space for love to prove itself. Because when an avoidant pulls away and then comes back, it's not the absence of love. It's love fighting its way through fear. One of the most confusing things about avoidants is the way they wear their indifference like armor. You've seen it before? The calm face, the cool tone, the detached words. They act as though nothing gets to them, as though they could walk away without a second thought. And when you're on the other side of that, it's devastating. Because you tell yourself, if they cared, they wouldn't act so cold. If they loved me, I wouldn't have to question it. But here's what you need to understand. That mask of indifference is not the absence of emotion. It's the shield they build to protect it. Avoidants are not unfeeling. Quite the opposite. They often feel more than they know how to handle. But instead of expressing it, instead of admitting vulnerability, they hide behind control. They've been trained, either by their past or by their fears, that showing need, showing care, showing dependency is dangerous. So they construct a mask. They convince themselves, if I act like I don't care, I can't be hurt. If I never show need, no one can use it against me. That's not coldness. It's survival. Here's the irony: indifference doesn't need a mask. If someone truly doesn't care, they don't have to prove it. They don't need to act stoic. They don't need to stay composed. They simply move on. Indifference is effortless. But the avoidance calm exterior is anything but effortless. It's rehearsed, it's constructed, it's deliberate. And the very fact that they put so much effort into maintaining it is evidence that something powerful lies underneath. That's why you'll often notice cracks in the mask if you pay attention. A subtle hesitation in their voice when you talk about leaving. A flicker of tension in their eyes when you pull back. A sudden surge of protectiveness when you're threatened. Those aren't random. Those are the moments the mask slips. The moments their true feelings leak through, despite their best attempts to hide them. And those leaks are important because they prove the indifference isn't real. It's a performance. Now, why do they perform? Because vulnerability feels like exposure. To the avoidant, saying, I care, feels like handing over a weapon. It feels like surrendering control. And control is their safety blanket. They believe if they stay in control, they can't be abandoned. They can't be betrayed. They can't be hurt the way they were in the past. So they perfect the mask. They convince themselves that if they act detached, they can't be touched. But here's the catch: love doesn't respect masks. Love pushes through. Love finds the cracks. And every time you see that flash of real emotion, the protectiveness, the jealousy, the small but meaningful act of care, that's love breaking past their defenses. That's love refusing to be hidden. And here's something to reflect on: the stronger the mask, the stronger the emotion it's hiding. Nobody builds walls around empty land. Walls exist to protect something valuable. The avoidance mask of indifference exists for one reason: because the feelings underneath are too precious, too raw, too vulnerable to leave exposed. That's not a lack of love. That's love being protected like treasure. The tragedy is that many people give up when they see the mask. They assume the coldness is real. They tell themselves they don't care, they never will. And sometimes, out of self-protection, they walk away before ever realizing that what they saw wasn't truth. It was fear. And if you can understand that, if you can see the mask for what it really is, you gain an entirely new perspective. You stop reacting to the performance and start noticing the cracks. You stop being fooled by the armor and start recognizing the humanity underneath. Does this mean you should tolerate endless emotional unavailability? No. You don't sacrifice your worth to wait for someone else's healing, but it does mean you interpret accurately. You stop confusing silence with indifference, calmness with apathy, distance with rejection. You start to realize that sometimes the coldest mask is hiding the warmest fire. And here's where the choice lies for you. When you see the mask, will you assume it's truth and walk away in bitterness? Or will you recognize it for what it is, a shield built by fear, and decide whether that's a battle you want to stay in? Because awareness gives you power. Once you see the mask clearly, you can make a conscious choice, not a reactionary one. So the next time you're faced with an avoidant who looks calm, detached, and indifferent, I want you to remember this. Indifference doesn't need effort. Armor is only worn when there's something worth protecting. And behind that armor, behind that mask, there is almost always more love than they know how to show. Because the mask of indifference isn't proof of absence. It's proof of depth. And the deeper the love, the heavier the mask. When you've been around someone with an avoidant attachment style long enough, you'll notice something peculiar. They may resist, withdraw, or even sabotage closeness when it first shows up. But over time, their behavior starts to shift in ways that don't look like love at all on the surface. But in truth, they are love in disguise. And the final, most subtle indicator is this: when they start to show consistency, when they begin to anchor themselves in small but steady actions toward you, it is often their deepest declaration of love. Not flowers, not grand gestures, not eloquent words, but the fact that they keep showing up, even awkwardly, even imperfectly. Consistency for an avoidant is not natural. It's revolutionary. Understand what's at stake here. For someone who has lived their whole life protecting themselves from intimacy, closeness is a threat. To them, love feels like danger. It reminds them of the very experiences they've worked their whole life to avoid: disappointment, suffocation, betrayal, or abandonment. So their first instinct is not to lean in, but to pull away. And yet, when you see them leaning in despite the fear, you're watching an act of courage. You're witnessing love itself taking form in the most unexpected way, not with intensity, but with reliability. Think about it. Anyone can be intense. Anyone can come in with passion, fireworks, emotional highs, and magnetic attraction. That's easy. But for the avoidant, intensity is actually safer. It's short-lived, it doesn't demand vulnerability, and it allows them to retreat quickly when things get too real. Consistency, however, is different. Consistency demands that they override their own fear every single day. It demands they go against their programming. It means they've reached a point inside themselves where they've decided, my fear will not dictate my life anymore. That's not just behavior. That's transformation. This is why I tell people, stop looking for an avoidant to love you in the way Hollywood taught you love should look. That script doesn't apply here. With them, love is not about big words or constant reassurance. It's about the evidence of presence. The call that comes after silence. The text that comes without reason. The way they check in even when they don't know how to articulate why. Each act is a micro victory against the voice in their head telling them to retreat. And when you see that, you're not just seeing effort, you're seeing the emergence of trust. Here's the paradox most people miss. The avoidance love doesn't look like a sprint. It looks like a marathon. Slow, uneven, sometimes clumsy, but relentless in its forward motion once they decide to invest. Their presence might still come with moments of retreat because habits built over decades don't vanish overnight. But if they're coming back, if they're recalibrating instead of disappearing, it's not weakness, it's progress. It's the soul saying, I don't want to live behind these walls forever. And this is where your role becomes critical, because how you interpret their consistency will shape how it grows. If you dismiss it, mock it, or compare it to someone else's version of love, you risk reinforcing their old belief that intimacy is unsafe. But if you recognize it for what it is, if you see that the avoidant showing up again and again, in their own flawed but committed way, is the purest signal of love they can offer, then you create the environment where their love can deepen. It's not about lowering your standards. It's about recognizing that love, when it comes through the lens of fear, wears a different costume. What's powerful here is the lesson it teaches all of us. Love isn't about what's easy, it's about what costs us something. For the avoidant, consistency costs them their comfort zone, their pride, their shield. For you, it might cost patience, perspective, and restraint. But in the collision of those costs is where real intimacy is born. Because love isn't about erasing the fear, it's about choosing to move forward in spite of it. So when you see an avoidant showing consistency, when their actions start whispering, I'm still here, understand that you are witnessing something extraordinary. That's not hesitation. That's devotion. That's not avoidance anymore. That's love learning how to breathe. And if you walk away with nothing else from this, let it be this. Don't underestimate the quiet, steady rhythm of someone choosing you again and again, even when it terrifies them. That is not weakness. It is strength. That is not distance. It is devotion. That is love redefined.